Next, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Rob Thayer. Tim Hahn, who's in charge of our SAGE track, had brought his name up and what he was doing with the bioregional agriculture, and none of us had any idea of what it is. I mean, quite honestly, it's a completely new thought process, but it's phenomenal. When I really start looking into it and the way of thinking and the way he's doing things, I think you're really going to enjoy what he has to say. Let me give you a little background on him. Professor Thayer is Professor of Landscape Architecture and the founder of the Landscape Architecture program at the University of California, Davis. In his 38-year academic career, he has written 2 books, several book-length monographs, and over 100 academic articles and papers in the field of landscape architecture. Holding degrees from Cornell University and Stanford University, Robert Thayer has spent nearly his entire professional career at UC Davis. Exceptions being appointments at James Hill Visiting Professor of Landscape Architecture at the University of Minnesota in 1988, and Beatrix Farrand Distinguished Visiting Professor of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning, College of Environmental Design at UC Berkeley from 2006 to 2009. So I am so excited to hear all the great things he has to say, so please welcome Professor Thayer.
Thank you, Linda, and I'm delighted to be here. Let me ask a critical question. Can you see the screen okay? Is it all right, everything's fine. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. It's also terrifying. I'm 3 generations removed from a Wisconsin dairy farm, and I can't claim at all to be a farmer. In fact, I can't even get the aphids off my Russian kale. Nor am I a foodie. I can scramble some eggs, but I leave the cooking to other people. But I know a good meal when I see one, and I have been at an agricultural institution for 40 years. And I'm also a Luddite, and I like actual tech. There we go. Is that better? Okay, that's the whole thing. I suppose the reason I'm here is because since graduate school I have been studying and researching the whole notion of renewable energy and energy conservation, water conservation, soil conservation. All of these things were subsequently rolled into the notion of sustainability. So I have been essentially studying and researching sustainability before sustainability was cool and before it came in and almost went out of vogue as a topic. Let's see if I can make this, there we go. So what I'm here to talk about, and this is the keynote, if you want to call it that, is that I am a bioregionalist. I am somebody who believes that an affiliation with and an investment in a local naturally bounded region is really an appropriate way for us to solve problems and to live our lives. So what is a bioregion? And you can read this with me. A bioregion can be variously defined by the geography of climate, watersheds, similar plant and animal ecosystems, and related identifiable landforms like mountain ranges or prairies or forests or coastal zones, and by the unique human cultures that grow from the natural limits and potentials of the region. Take a look at this image for a second and ask yourself, what do you think the world would be like if we identified with our own particular natural patch of the earth? And these ideas have been around for a couple of decades. I'm going to use the words life place, bioregion, natural region interchangeably. And I have 2 basic messages that I want to emphasize today. First of all, a shared sense of identity with a natural region will help solve a number of problems that we face, and you'll hear briefly about those problems in a minute. And second, and most of all, that local agriculture by its very nature is bioregional. Growing food with respect to the natural potentials and limitations of a place is probably the most positive social trend I can think of in my field, environmental planning and design today. So we live you and I, in two very strong bioregions. Yours, I understand, was created by glaciation. Mine was created by flooding and uplift. Your endemic species or emblematic tree is the Douglas fir. Mine is the valley oak. The first people in your region carved canoes out of cedar, whereas our indigenous people made them out of tule reeds. Yours is the home of the potlatch. Mine is the home of the spirit renewal ceremony. Seattle and Sacramento is not Seattle, but salmon swim through the city limits of both of these cities. So your ancestors, or your predecessors rather, smoked the salmon. The indigenous people in my region dried them on racks and pulverized the meat and mixed them into acorn soup. And so what the point here is that in each place there is and was an appropriate way to live and to make a living. And I think that's something that we need to remember, and it's only been in the age of fossil fuels where we've forgotten that there are appropriate ways and not so appropriate ways to deal with the natural productivity of a life place. I think that we've been stumbling into globalism without realizing what we are giving up. There's a philosophical question I've been asking myself for 2 decades. And think about it for a moment. What is now and what should be global? What is now and should be local? This is not an easy question. Should our food be local? Should our energy be local? Our culture, should that be local? So we've stumbled into globalism, and I think that points to a possibility of rethinking the way we deal with the earth. Now, this slide is a fairly much of an academic mouthful. It's a bioregional hypothesis, which is a fancy way of saying I have a hunch about a natural life place. And there's 3 basic points that I'd like to make. Actually, I'll keep that slide on. One is that bioregions exist. If we were not here, either in the Puget Sound bioregion, or if our people were not in the Sacramento Valley, the region would be there in its natural form. If human beings vanished, there is a place called a life place or a natural region. That's what you'd call fundamental. Culturally, there have been cultures that have learned how to live in this area for quite some time, and we might learn something about them. And finally, there's a practical philosophy that we need to know how to do it today, right here, right now, without screwing it up for the future, to be blunt about it. Now, when I wrote my book, Life Place, it was based on a kind of stair step. And this diagram you see here is essentially 3 different things. It's the way a region evolves kind of culturally, as starting with the actual basis of the bioregion. It's a way for somebody like yourself or anyone in the world to look at their own region and say, I think I can see the world with a new lens and look at my own region and develop this same kind of appreciation and practical knowledge. And it was third, something that I did in exploring my own region. So when you look at a region, the first thing you see really is the physical place itself. I call these the bones of the bioregion. The slides I'm going to show you are referring to my own home, because I don't know your place, I only know mine, really. So it all starts with the geology and the soil and the climate and the latitude. It's interesting for me to tell you that I live on Yolo clay loam soil with 10,000 feet of alluvium beneath my feet. And if it were not for that fact in my home, I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be who I was, I wouldn't be doing what I was. In our region, the flood is the reason why the soil is there, and so this is essentially fundamental, the bottom level of the stairs to everything else that follows above it. The next level up the staircase is the actual natural life of the region. Who colonizes, what plants, what animals. Farmers are probably the most logical group of people to fully realize that they're living in a live region. Not everybody has that kind of awareness. So I think for many people who are non-farmers, the 98% of us, it's difficult sometimes to wake up and realize with all the concrete and traffic around that we really do live in a live region. The next step up is to essentially explore the culture, re-inhabiting. Here's a little factor of geography that you might want to think about. Probably every place in this region, in these watersheds, as well as the area where I come from, has an organization that's nonprofit, volunteer-based, that's decided that it's going to look after the place that it is. And this is essentially an alternative geography. And here's a map that overlays the two watersheds that flow through my home. This is not a government map. This is a non-government map. So it's interesting. I encourage you to think about what are those organizations in your own watersheds that do that. The other thing I would suggest, which is starting to happen in the Sacramento Valley region, is that people are discovering that it's worthy of art. 15 years ago, no one ever painted anything about the Central Valley where I live. It was a void between the Coast Range and the Golden Gate Bridge and the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, artists have discovered the beauty in the agricultural land, and this has all happened in the last decade. You have to ask yourself, why is this? What is it about the place that all of a sudden people are painting and saying, this is emotional to me, I care about this place? And then, of course, as you work your way up the staircase, you get to the practical thing, and that's why we're all here. The local food movement is a good example of what I call a bioregional economy, in that you're exchanging natural values. The little map up in the upper right-hand corner of the slide you see is the food shed of the Davis Farmers Market where I live. And it's about 250 miles across. And right off the bat, that suggests something about a new type of geography. And then we come to my profession, which is environmental planning and design. And this is a diagram that you see from, obviously from the Sacramento region. But in looking at the way we think about spaces and plan them, we have to realize that there are kind of three co-equal parts here. It's especially true in my region with the emphasis on farming, and I presume it is with yours too. Look at the chart in the middle, which is the agricultural heart of our region. We're there, the people are there in the Sacramento Valley because of the soil. So we have first and foremost to acknowledge that's what we're going to do for a living, probably for the indefinite future. And then we also have to understand that there's also a life place for animals and plants, that we're not the only inhabitants. And then when we look at our own infrastructure, we have to do it right and try and make it as regenerative as possible. And then the next step up, we're getting higher on that staircase, is the notion of building. How do you make a bioregion work? This is essentially nothing that I have to really belabor as a point for you, because you are already doing this. The next step up is, we've already heard some references to this, is the notion of learning. Think about education the way it is in higher education. Most of the universities are trying to develop global specialists where you learn one particular thing and you communicate with everybody else in the world about that. We just heard that a new way of thinking about education is to train what you might call general localists. So these are people who know all about a local place. Imagine if you could go to a university and major in Puget Sound studies or Sacramento Valley studies or Palouse studies. I think that's a real possibility. And then finally, at the top of the step is, if you see yourself as a citizen or a resident of a natural region, what are you going to do about it? How do you take personal responsibility? The slide you're looking at has very deep personal meaning for me because it represents the peace treaty that was done by some of us in the local watershed, where we acknowledged that the water from Lake Berryessa, which is dammed up on Puda Creek, has to also take care of fish as well as people. So we had a ceremony where people would grab a cup of water out from the upstream side of the dam, go over to the diversion dam, pour half the cup in the channel, and then that was for humans, and then go down to the natural stream corridor, pour the other half of the water in the natural stream to essentially heighten the significance of the fact that we share water with animals as well. Now, since I wrote the book, there are a couple of issues that have come to the fore. You're familiar with them, but I think we should talk about them anyway, because these are the problems that I think our food shed systems might be able to solve. Global warming needs no introduction. This was a sculpture by an artist in Spain who made these little heads and put them in a puddle. And it doesn't need really much more explanation than that. Global warming is going to throw a curveball at us. When I was looking at some of the maps, I noticed that unfortunately you may be trading salmon habitat for wineland in the future. And we have to ask ourselves how much we would like to have that happen, or what we will do if it does happen, and so forth. Another serious problem, I think, affecting all regions is the growing income inequality. Excuse the Y down there. I think it's no secret that the middle class is suffering. And this has definitely been true since the 70s. And I think that this is essentially kind of an unsustainable situation. One of the reasons for this is that the economy is based largely on information now. And I think there are structural problems with the economy that allow us to, or that lead us to essentially ascend the profit up in the pyramid and create wealth for the very highest groups of people. So I think this is one of the serious problems we face. Another thing that I'm very sensitive to, at least in California and basically almost every rural place I've been, and that is at the edge of the city, the political chasm appears, and the blue of the cities and the red of the countryside are growing a little bit further apart. I'm not sure that that's the case for you folks here, but I don't think it's a good thing, and I think it's something that we need to work on because I don't see how American values can survive if this gap becomes more of a chasm. And then finally, there is the cognitive dissonance about whether we use fossil fuels or not. There's a glut of oil now, and the price of oil is now $3 a gallon. And at the same time, we're trying to reduce the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere. This is what you might call a cognitive dissonance, which is something where your behaviors and your beliefs are in conflict with one another. It's like the doctor telling you need to lose 10 pounds and your hand's in the cookie jar. Or it's like taking a hot shower in California now when there's a drought and we hardly have enough water. So your mind tells you one thing and your behaviors tell you another. So we're at a kind of a conflict, and this is influencing the way we think about our regions. I like to think that somehow a region can be likened to a human body. It has a skeleton, which is the landforms and the climate and the rivers. It has flesh, which is the vegetation. It has a mind, which is the government and the institutions of higher learning. It has a heart, which is its philanthropic nonprofit organizations, its public welfare and religious organizations. It has metabolism, it has a digestive system. It consumes energy, both hydrocarbon and carbohydrate, to do its work. It has a neurological system in its information. We're doing this right now, we're part of that. It also has a waste system. And I think if we looked at the region as a human body and looked at the health of it, we would realize that some of these things that I just mentioned are untenable in the long run. But the good news is that the food shed, I think, is a concept which can do many things. It can help us share identity with a natural region. If there's a joint respect for the place by the people who share that place, even if they don't share political opinions, that is essentially inhabiting the place together. It can bridge rural and urban lifestyles. I think a region is a much better place to respond to climate change than a country. It's a lot easier to create renewable energy for 200,000 people than it is for 200 million. I think the possibility is, and I'll have to knock on wood, but I'm optimistic that the farming systems that are emerging now eventually will be able to replace the respect for the middle class. Farming is a real, tangible part of work, and it's such a contrast to so much of the work that we do in other realms of the world. So one of the important takeaways for this talk is that local food is a form of communication. When somebody grows something for a market, he understands or she understands something about that person. When somebody buys something from a producer, he or she understands a little bit about that person's lifestyle. So the local food system is a vehicle for reciprocity and mutual understanding. Now, I want to tell you a story about a water and food and a kind of situation which was very ugly for a while but came to a good resolution. I was vacationing with my wife in 2007 up the coast of California, and I came to a town near the outfall of the Klamath River, and there, parked in a yard, was a big fishing boat and a sign that said, salmon fishermen, an endangered species. And then I was driving farther away up. We went into Oregon for a while. We came down into the Klamath Basin, and we were driving through a small town in Northern California, and I saw another sign that said, potato farmers, an endangered species. And I wasn't quite aware. I mean, I had heard about what was going on in the Klamath. But consider this for a second. Both of these things are food sources. So the history behind the conflict was that for endangered species purposes in 2001, there was a drought. The water from an old established federal irrigation system in the Klamath Basin was curtailed because of the effect it might have on the fish. And this infuriated the potato farmers, many whose fields were fallowed and they could not make a living. And they ended up breaking the locks on the irrigation flue and took some water. And the next year, the vice president in 2002 said, I'm going to give you your water. That was another drought year, and 70,000 salmon died in the lower river. The salmon fishermen were extremely unhappy, as were the native tribes. And basically what happened was people retreated to their corners, threw insults and lawsuits at each other, complained to their congressmen, and a very serious water war broke out. The good thing about it was how it resolved itself, or how it was resolved. Ultimately, the people who were at the working end of both of this watershed got together and started talking to each other. They basically bypassed the federal government. They went directly to each other. And the real breakthrough, I think, came when the salmon fishermen came up to the farmers in the upper Klamath Basin and sat down with them, had a meal and talked to them. And then the reciprocal happened. The farmers went down to the lower basin and talked to the fishermen. In addition to this, there was a settlement agreement where Pacific Corps agreed to retire 4 very old dams that would cost more to relicense and put fish ladders in than it would cost to take away. So ultimately, as you can read from the slide, peace comes to the river. And I'm not sure whether everything is hunky-dory there now, but it's generally been considered a success. And the takeaway from this that I would like to leave you with is a message that a bioregion should not be a blunt political instrument. We don't want to get into a corner and say, we want to save the fish and we don't care about your potatoes. Or we need our irrigation, we don't care about the fish. A bioregion is not a political instrument, it's a round table. And everybody deserves a place at the round table. And the point about this slide, which is really actually brings tears to your eyes when you think about it, the fishermen came up and did a float in a parade in Klamath Falls with the potato farmers, potatoes and salmon. And then think about this, that if you're subscribing to Weight Watchers, both salmon and potatoes are a power food. So you don't have to choose between the two of them. One of the good things that's happening is that in many cases the government knows how far to get involved in some things. My niece, Rachel Vasic, is the executive director of the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association, and she tells me that this is one of some 16 salmon enhancement associations, all of which are basically volunteer organizations. The similar kind of government structure which allows local control also exists, I know, in Nebraska's natural resource districts, also in the country of New Zealand, where they have actually set up environmental courts with soil scientists and landscape architects on the court system in the country to resolve disputes. There's a curriculum for the bioregion here in Washington run by Jean McGregor, and this is something which I tried to do at our own institution for 10 years, and it's delightful that it's happening up here. It shows that this region has some extra potential at solving its own local problems. This is also an international phenomenon. I'm not sure I can speak Italian very well, Progetto di Bioregione, but there is an organization in Italy that's dedicated scientifically to bringing back local food in the various food regions of Italy. There's also a movement in the University of Leicester in the UK, and a whole bioregional economics focus is occurring. I even had a graduate student contacting me over the last 3 years from Tehran, Iran, who wants to apply the bioregional approach to her own native regions in that country. As you would expect, the academic world has discovered the local. 20 years ago, the local was not to be trifled with in academia. You know, who cares about the local? But now it's very much in vogue, and I think for very good reasons and not superficial ones. I've had the opportunity over the years to work with a number of wonderful graduate students in the planning and design fields, and I'm going to show you some of their master's thesis work. Susan Ellsworth got her degree in master's degree in community development in 2011, and what she did for her master's thesis was to look at the public lands owned by the city of Davis around the periphery of the city, and at the urging of the city to help them determine which pieces of land they should put community farms on. Normally we assume regional or city parks will have soccer fields and baseball diamonds. This time the idea was to actually put active farms in the public parks, and that was her thesis. Nick Glaze is an architect. He took a camp, a farm and a wilderness camp that was 100 years old in Vermont that was started by Quakers, and in his words, designed it so that it was more than just a petting zoo. And I have never seen an individual who was not necessarily a farmer come in and look at the farm system so thoroughly that it essentially blew the minds of his professors, including myself. I wish I could show you all his thesis. You would be extremely impressed. There were students that I taught in a graduate course at Berkeley in 2005 who decided to take the city of Napa, that's at the south end of the Napa Valley, identify all the farmable parcels that were not being farmed, develop a diverse supply CSA, complete with food hubs that would bring the produce together, and then designed an entire distribution system. And they even wrote a city ordinance, a draft city ordinance for the city of Napa to adopt to try and implement this kind of plan. Another student I had took a food desert in West Oakland and designed an entire food shed plus the market where the produce would be sold. She identified the actual farms, which are the dots, did a cluster analysis, figured out a mechanism for the trucks to bring the food in, analyzed the circles in the lower left are all the places where you could buy junk food but not good food. And then she even went so far as to design the garden in the parking lot. She won a national planning award for this project. And then my colleague at UC Davis, Claire Napawan, has done a study of the Bay Area for what you might call food resilience. This is a kind of worst case scenario for how would you bring food to the Bay Area in California under periods of extreme duress where the fuel supply was interrupted or something of that nature. And so this is another sort of phase of study that some people are getting involved in. Now I'm getting near the end of my talk. I want to talk about two individual farmers who have been very inspirational to me personally. The person you're looking at is Craig McNamara. Craig has an interesting background. His father was Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War era. Craig understandably wanted nothing to do with Washington and decided he was going to move very far away and become a farmer. And he bought a walnut farm in Winters, California 30 years ago. And after about 5 years of farming, he realized that the educational system for training farmers was inadequate. So he founded an organization which is near and dear to my heart called the Center for Land-Based Learning. I want to read you gotten ahead of myself, but I want to read you the mission statement of this organization, because it says a lot about who Craig is. Our mission is to inspire and motivate people of all ages, especially youth, to promote a healthy interplay between agriculture, nature, and society through their own actions as leaders in their communities. The Center for Land-Based Learning envisions a world where there is meaningful appreciation and respect for our natural environment and for the land that produces our food and sustains our quality of life. So right off the bat, this organization was created with a two-pronged philosophy. The environment matters and agriculture matters, and we're going to marry the two of them. The program that I'm showing you right now on the slide is a student landowner education and watershed workshops. What this organization does is bring junior high school and high school students from inner cities out to restore habitat on farms and ranches. And the farmers and ranchers agree to this happening, and then they come out and talk to the students. So this is that communication between the rural and the urban that I'm talking to you about. And my son was involved as an employee of this organization for several years. There's another program that does similar things, bringing inner city students from high schools out to farms and teaching farming to these kids in high school and allowing them to have internships. And that was such a successful program that another one was launched called the California Farm Academy. And this has some interesting statistics also. It's a 7-month program on site mostly that provides an intensive overview of what it takes to become a farmer. And I'm going to read you a couple of statistics because this is actually quite inspiring. There were 61 students altogether in the first 3 years. This is the end of the 3rd year, including 5 military veterans. 80% of the participants are now farming. 58 have graduated from the program. 13 farmers have participated in an incubator program on the CLBL property. 16 alumni own and farm their own land. 6 graduates farm family land. 7 alumni are looking to buy land. So this is a highly successful program. And that brings me to my last topic, which is related to CLBL, and that's this individual you're looking at now. This is my hero, my vision of what farming is capable of doing. Toby Hastings had no background in farming whatsoever, and I'm sure his family was generations much farther removed from the farm. He talked to Craig McNamara one time at the introduction of my son and agreed to lease some of Craig's land, starting with 3 acres, on the condition that, for a low-cost lease, on the condition that he helped train farmers at the center. He is now farming on 10 acres. That's an aerial photograph of his farm. And he is highly successful, and so successful that he was one of the San Francisco Zagat blog's 30 under 30 up-and-comers of 2013. He farms largely with only temporary help. For the first year, he rode his bicycle from Davis to his farm, 11 miles each way. He now has only 1 tractor. He says the biggest expense for his farm now is cardboard boxes. He recycles all the cardboard boxes, but I want to list some of the crops that he grows. He calls his farm Free Spirit Farm. He grows tomatoes, sweet peppers, hot peppers, eggplant, summer and winter squashes, potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions, cucumbers, melons, watermelon, basil, parsley, and various herbs, cut flowers, blackberries, raspberries, apples, pears, peaches, apricots, pluots, cherries, pomegranates, quince, figs, and kumquats. Now, I think you probably know something that in 5 years he'll probably cut that list down a little bit. But he is producing these, and I am convinced that this man produces more calories of food per hydrocarbon input than anybody I know. I would love a graduate student to measure that, to see whether that hunch is correct. And it's impolite to talk about salary, but let's put it this way. Toby Hastings and Free Spirit Farm had an income larger last year than a certain retired professor that I know very well. So I'm going to summarize the takeaways from this. First of all, a bioregion is an ideal place and an ideal scale for sustaining human and non-human life. And that the food shed, which is something I will hopefully articulate more in my workshop with mapping, is a natural outgrowth of a life place, and that local food systems, in addition to sustaining us, are a form of communication. And it's a form of communication that we must continue to use. And it's a mutual understanding between producers and citizens. And that a life place is a round table. Everybody deserves a place at the table. And it should not be a blunt political instrument, but an open table and an open forum for communication. and that a shared identity with a natural region and its food systems is a practical solution to today's seemingly intractable problems. So what I like to do at the end of talks that I've given is to quote from a 13th century Zen monk and poet who said, "If you can't find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it?" Thank you very much.